I already told Jason my story. It's kind of a busy week, and I thought, oh, you know what? I've been looking at this, and I think it would be a lot better to do a PowerPoint for this, just to kind of walk through, because there's a lot of things that would help me and might help you a little bit. So I spent some time yesterday evening, and then I got to church this morning, and so I made the PowerPoint, and there's no power cord for our computer. So I texted Cole, there's an emergency, I need a power cord for the computer, and he got me a power cord. And now we realize that there's no projector anymore, and you can't hook the VGA into the TV. So I'm going to hold this up. We're just going to skim through. No, I'm not really. But I am going to kind of use it, and we're just going to wing it a little bit. So I'll give you some imagination. If you want me to tell you what the pictures would have been on each slide, I can do that as we go along. But it will kind of help me as we walk through that. So this session, if you will, is called How to Be in Healthy Authority Over Your Children. So what have we been talking about as far as the polar opposites? What are the two extremes that we've been looking at? For those of you coming in, Dr. Sue's just testing some new technology, so this is not necessarily a permanent thing. So he's not going to turn the camera on you. He tells me, so pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Where's your curtain, Dr. Sue? How about, what are the two things we've been talking about? The one in the middle, I'll give you a hint, was what? Authoritative. So what were the two extremes? Permissive and authoritarian. So authoritarian is what?
Really strict.
Lay down the hammer, super strict. Permissive, probably very indecisive, not making good, not really wanting to be the parent in some ways, letting the kid kind of take over. So authoritative in the middle is kind of that middle ground, which is, we're going to continue to talk about that. So how do we do that? We've been touching on it, and we're going to talk about some different things. I want you to think about the scene. Imagine the picture I have out here for you. Everybody seen The Sound of Music at least once? Most of you? So you remember when the captain introduces the children? What does he do? The whistle. What happens when he whistles? Yeah, first they all march in step, right? From shortest to oldest to youngest. They are all in step, and then when he blows their whistle for them, what do? They say their name. First they step out, click their heels like a good Austrian, I guess, and say their name. You guys remember that? Yeah. How many of you ever wished you had kids like that? Don't you think that? I mean, you mentioned this morning, getting kids to church sometimes is a little bit crazy. Wouldn't it be nice if you just had some sort of magic whistle and boom, there they went. But I want you to remember that no matter what, they might be able to comply. We talked about that, compliance, doing what you ask, but guiding them and growing them is different. And so no matter how healthy and realistic your expectations are, and you should have healthy, realistic expectations for your kids, but they won't always come true, right? So what's another scene you remember from The Sound of Music where the kids are wearing curtains, they're dripping wet, they're giggling and laughing. And so I just want you to think that kids are going to make mistakes, right? Hey, good morning. Kids are going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes as parents, right? So just as you'd like them to be fantastic and wonderful and do everything that you ask, you'd also like to hold yourself to an accountability that says you're going to always make the right decision and always do the right thing, and you're not always going to do the right thing. And so I kind of hold up that authoritarian and permissive, and I want us to keep thinking about that, but know that it's not, well, if I ever go there, well, I blew it. There's nothing else that I can do. How many of you, I'm not a big baseball person, but how do you measure stats when somebody comes to bat? You say we're batting average. And so most really good players are about 1,000, isn't that right? That's kind of the goal. Everybody wants to beat 1,000. How many great, amazing players were 1,000? What does 1,000 mean? They hit the ball every single time. It's not even a goal, right? Again, I'm no baseball aficionado necessarily, but the reality is that you don't even shoot for that. What do you try to shoot for? What is a fantastic one, Andrew? That's yours. Yeah, 300, which is the equivalent of 30%. And that's the greats, right? So what's a normal baseball player? Is this going to matter in 6 minutes? Do you think you're going to lose a job because of this? Do you think that you're going to see somebody that's going to who's going to give you $1 million and now they're not going to do it? Is it going to matter 6 hours from now? Is it going to matter 6 days from now, 6 weeks? is it going to matter in 6 months? So there's a lot of things when you start talking about, remember me telling my story, my sister getting the hair cut here and all that kind of stuff. Is that going to matter in 6 months? So when you start thinking about these expectations, are there expectations that you maybe need to relax a little bit? If you remember, we talked about birth order. That'll come back a little bit more. Birth order, if you're a firstborn or an only child, you probably have a harder time letting go of those things. If you're maybe a youngest, we said, at least stereotypically, you're like, oh, don't worry about that at all. It's no big deal. So some of you may struggle with that more than others, but I want you to kind of keep that rule in mind as you think about those expectations that you have and the expectations that you hold your kids to. Thoughts? Have you ever tried that? Doesn't have to be called the 666 rule.
My mother-in-law said something about that the other time, not that exact.
Right.
But we were talking about a grade Zach made, and she goes, "Is it really going to matter in a year that he made that on there?" Because I was really rude and no, but in the moment you don't.
Right.
Think about it that way.
Yep. I think a lot of times, and I think we said this when we started first talking about authoritarian and permissive, that probably
Where you kind of learn as you go, you know, you're
We're gonna get this right.
That baby one.
Mhm.
And kind of with the teaching thing too, I started out very strict, very hard when I first started teaching, and I can see myself, things that I would have sent people to office for in the beginning, now you just take care of yourself.
Absolutely. I'm thinking, and this may not be true, but I think I've heard this before, stereotypically anyway, that teachers kind of start out a little harsh with the students in a year. Am I true? Is that right? You get new students in, you have to be a little harsher with them. And that's not even you, that's kind of getting your bluff in, if I understand the process. So they have to know that they will have to obey. Well, maybe there's some value in that, but you normally, most teachers, I'm assuming, will relax that just a little bit. So we're going to take this week and next week. We're not going to get through all of these, but these are kind of the Magnificent Seven, is what Kevin Lehman called them. We're going to call these the Magnificent Seven rules for how to, am I spelling that? Magnificent Seven for how to lead your children healthy, with healthy authority. Okay? Let's kind of look at them as we go through. The first one we're going to talk about, you can see them up here. First one is pray for your children. So the idea of teaching them at your knee, kind of that old, idea of, well, they're small, you have to teach them because they're down here, but teaching them on your knees as well. Have you thought about praying for your children? Do you pray for your children? So the picture you're getting ready to see on the next slide is a foundation of a house. Some of you will appreciate that. So if you think about a house, there are things, we went in one day when they were building our house and we looked, and long story short, there was a wall that was just wrong. It was a smart, short wall, and it was like, that's too close. And by the time we actually called the builder, he said, oh, we've already moved that. We've already taken care of it. A wall on top, you know what? I can change some things around. But if I get the foundation wrong, we've got a problem, right? If there's a problem with the foundation. Kevin Lehman tells a story about his builder who was very efficient and all that kind of stuff, but he went out one day, he was going to be traveling, so he went out like at 5:30 in the morning to look at the house before he left, and his builder was out there at 5:30, and he said, what the heck are you doing? It's not even light out here. And he said, I don't have to be here every day, but I have to be here today because they're pouring the foundation. So I want you to think about praying for your kids as the foundation. And it's not just praying for them, but it's the idea of teaching them spiritual truth. I want somebody to look, I need two verses. If you look at 2 Timothy 1:3 and somebody else 2 Timothy 1:5. I just want to talk a little bit about Timothy and this foundation of praying for your kids. Who's got 2 Timothy 1:3? Anybody? You don't have to have it. You got it, Joni? How about 2 Timothy 1:5? Somebody got that? Got it? Okay, so when you get there, Joni, read for us 2 Timothy 1:3.
I thank God, whom I serve as my forefathers did, with a clear conscience as night and day. I constantly remember you in my prayers.
So this is Paul writing to Timothy. And you know what he's saying to Timothy, who he basically treated as a son? We're going to actually hear a little bit more about that in 5 as well. He's saying, I'm praying for you night and day. I'm praying for you every single day. Are we praying for our kids every single day? the second part of that foundation is really 2 Timothy 3:5. Read that for us, Amanda.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
That's okay. Oh, I said 3:5. Did you read 3:3? It's
I read
1:5. 1:3 is correct, and 1:5. Sorry.
Oh, one.
My bad.
Sorry,
My
sorry.
bad. 1:3 and 1:5.
Go back. I need to go back. I'll get there.
Sorry, it was my fault.
Oh, there it is. Okay, 2 Timothy 1:5.
5. Yes.
Having been reminded of the unfeigned
I got it right.
faith that is in thee, which dwelt first in thy grandmother Lois and thy mother Eunice,
Yes, you're obviously King James. Very nice.
and I am persuaded in thee also.
Okay.
That's American Standard.
Yes. Oh, really? So he's talking about what he was taught from who? Did you get that? From whom? From his grandmother. Eunice was her name. And his mother Lois. So it wasn't just praying, although that's important. We can assume that that happened, but also he was being taught. So what are we teaching our kids spiritually? Obviously, this is Sunday school. I want to make a connection that you may have already seen. So obviously, this is Sunday school, so we're going to talk about, right, spiritual aspects of it. But I want you to see these others that we're going to go to that are very practical. We'll bring some passages in, and we'll look at them. The foundation is that we're not only praying for our kids, but we're teaching them spiritual truths, which is what Mom and Grandma for sure did for Timothy. So how do we teach them? Give me some examples. There's 100 ways. There's a million ways, maybe. What are some examples?
Well, obviously by example.
Okay,
how
so
we
give me...
feel things. When they see us doing something kind for someone else, it might be considered unlovely to the world.
And if you're thinking of that teachable moment, you do that, and then it's not that you go, look at me, I'm such a great Christian, but you could say one of the reasons that I do that is because of the grace that God has shown for me.
And this is just what we do.
This is what we do.
Yeah.
I do think sometimes we have to make the connection for kids, though, because if it's just that kind of lifestyle, hey, my mom was a nice person, my dad is really, he really takes care of things. Those are great, but making the connection and helping them see, hey, what's driving that? What's drawing us to do that, right? What's another way that we teach our kids? Morning, guys.
I think the choices they make, like what they want to listen to, or read, or watch, or stuff, people they want to follow, the way they want to dress, and all that. Is this honoring to God? Is what you're seeing this person, celebrity, whatever, doing? I mean, because we've had conversations with Patty, and she's like, "Why does it always have to be about God?" And I'm like, "Well, because
you're doing a good job then."
it is.
That's awesome.
God's over everything. Everything needs to
Absolutely
honor Him. What we listen to, what we read. He made our bodies. We're the temple of God,
nice.
And so, everything needs to be about that. Not that you have to go around singing hymns all the time.
Sure.
You can have your other stuff, but just is this something that God would be pleased with you reading this or watching it on your phone, or would He be honored with you hanging out with those people? Would He be honored with you dressing that way or supporting this group or that?
Nice.
We kind of try to bring that up in everything because she has this. I know I think it's because it is.
So if you just turned around and said, "Hey, go back to your room. You are not wearing that outfit. Get it off right now." Would that be in a way honoring God? Sure, I'm not going to allow you to do something that is dishonoring to God, but taking the time not only to pray for them that they'll make good decisions, but help and guide them through the decisions they need to make, right?
Even being a student, I know she hate homework at school. I'm like, well, yeah, it's always fun, but let's honor God with showing good work ethic and studying and not just having this not care attitude about things. And so, yeah, it's not fun, but let's show some wherewithal, whatever, to stick with it and do it.
That's good
stuff. So,
that's not always easy to teach.
No.
What else can you do to teach your kids about God?
Watch and remind them that God is watching.
Okay.
Too.
Okay.
Watch every move.
Certainly, it's possible to go way over authoritarian with that, right? But giving an appropriate understanding that everything we do is viewed by God, right? And I always think about the experiencing God, I don't know if many of you have done that, but experiencing God, kind of the idea that God is acting and I want to join him, as opposed to God is watching and waiting to hit the spike key. He's acting and he's doing all those things, and I want to respond to him, not to gain his favor, but because of his love and favor, I want to respond that way. So helping them see that.
Quick example, this week we were focusing on trying to get the boys to not walk past messes, but to actively participate in cleaning them up. And
That's not how that
we
goes.
had this whole, conversation about it. And then it wasn't a few hours later, I had to stop Landon and say, hey, Betty, did you just seriously take a run and go and jump over the blanket that had fallen off the back of the couch? What did we just talk about,
Nice.
It's like obvious that,
I
that should have been picked.
I've said this a million times, we are great at forgetting. We're not very good at remembering, but we're really good at forgetting. So God reminds us, why aren't we reminding our kids, hey, this is something this is what we do. So I think one that we do that we don't always think about is we just flat bring them to church. I don't think that can be the only one, but I think having them here for Sunday school and youth group, and at whatever age they are, right? There's an opportunity for them to be taught through others. Why is that important? Why is it important for them to be taught from other than just us?
They're so used to tuning this out.
Mm-hmm.
They hear it from somebody else, somebody they think is cool,
Exactly.
or that they look up to.
Mm-hmm. They know us, right? Warts and all, and so we get that
Maybe
reinforcement.
someone else can maybe put it in a way that maybe, even like my parents could even put things differently, and it may, wake them up to where I may be kind of struggling with figuring out how to address it. Maybe they can put the same thing that we're trying to teach them to them in a different way.
Absolutely. I have a lot of things that I say over and over and over. You've heard a lot of things, positive spiral, and there's just a lot of things that I say over and over. I have a new one that I think I want to start saying over and over to you. I heard this week from a gentleman that we were talking to about coming as our transitional pastor, and he said, what they're saying now is that used to people consider themselves actively engaged in church if they were in the building 3 or 4 times a week. Now people consider themselves actively engaged if they're in the building 3 or 4 times a month. Isn't that interesting? I'm a fully engaged believer because I'm here 3 or 4 times a month. That's just interesting to me. I'm not trying to step on anybody's toes, but I think when we think about teaching our kids, we can do so much. And at a certain point, there has to be some reinforcement from others.
I think it builds a sense of unity and church unity that we should have, and also just community.
Yep.
That we're all doing this together, and if my girls know that Pastor Jim talks to them about, these Bible concepts, that when they're out in public and they see Pastor Jim, it reminds them of those Bible concepts. That he has that expectation for them too.
What's the old saying? It takes a village
Yeah.
to raise a child.
I think it also gives them a chance to bring something up, like Maddie and Malachi will get in the car for church, and they'll start talking about what they talked about or in class, and they're able to initiate that conversation with God. So instead of us constantly bringing it up, they're like, oh, did you know, blah, 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 and then they start the whole conversation from there.
So I'm curious, when you pray at night or when you pray at meals, do you always pray or do you ask your kids to pray? Are you kind of teaching them that, hey, mom and dad do this, but we want you to do this as well, right? We want to give you that safe place to grow up. I think there are lots of adults that say, I just don't pray in front of people. I don't do that. I might pray, but I'm never going to pray in front of people. Can I teach them in the home as I'm praying for them and I'm praying with them and I'm teaching them really as they grow, right?
I decided it was time to start talking to my 6th grader about spiritual warfare. She doesn't really know what that means, just because of things I've dealt with kids her age. And so then when I prayed in front of her on the way to school, I pray things that relate to that to help her start having more of an understanding of. They just understand that. They don't know what that means.
Yep. Great
They
example.
deal with it every day. They just don't realize that's what's going on. So that's just something I've just recently said. I need to make her aware of this as a young Christian, that this is going on.
I think about when we pray, you know, is it just God is great, God is good, let us thank Him for food, or do they know that we're praying for things that we're struggling with, or they know things that, hey, I've got this big presentation tomorrow, or whatever? Do they see us praying for the things in our life? So again, just a lot of thinking there, a lot of thoughts, and we'll kind of bring that one back in as we go along. The second one says really to be firm but fair, which is kind of where we've been going with authoritative, right? Not authoritarian, not permissive, but being firm but fair. There's a nice little slide now that tells you some of these things, but when we fail to meet our child's needs, he has certain needs, he or she has certain needs. They need to be loved and respected, right? And accepted, really. They need to be secure and relatively free from threat. You can't control everything, but they need a certain level of security. That's what your kids need. They need to belong. They need to feel included. They need to be approved of. They need to be recognized for the things that they do well, right? They need somebody who's doing that. And it might be a coach or a band director or whatever, but they need it from you. They need to move towards independence. They need to be able to start making their own decisions and have responsibilities. So if those are the things that they need, what we need to do is not fall into the permissive or authoritarian trap, because either one of those drags down their sense of self-image and their sense of self-worth. Can you see how being authoritative would drag down your sense of self-worth? Sorry, authoritarian would drag down your sense of self-image and self-worth. Back to that, get back in there and change your clothes, and don't let me see you come out of that room again like that. How does that make you feel when you get yelled at and trounced on by your parents? I lose that sense of self-worth. Really, who am I? I don't do anything right. You get that? That's kind of makes sense to me. What about the permissive side? How does be a permissive parent? Imagine, you know, Eli. We talked about Eli, his sons. How does a permissive parent make them lose or destroys their sense of self-image and self-worth? You got it. You think of it.
They don't care about the person, so just go off and come home when you're ready. I mean,
I know
it's kind of that, oh, they don't care about me, so I can come in whenever, I can dress however, I can, you know, it kind of
almost
just, they feel like you don't care about their safety or their appearance or their character or whatever. I mean,
you would think that a parent who is permissive, they would be thinking in their heads, well, they need to feel loved and accepted, so I'm accepting anything. Well, if you accept anything, then it doesn't make any difference at all, right? It's back to that old, I hate to say it, if everybody gets a trophy, did anybody get a trophy? Why didn't we all just get a Hershey Kiss? Because it's the same thing if everybody got a trophy. And if it's that, why didn't we just give everybody a pat on the back? So as a parent, I expect more from you. Why? Because I love you. And it's my role, it's my job to protect you and encourage you and guide you and all of those things, right? So when you think about those needs of belonging and feeling accepted and being recognized for what you do well, as a parent, we don't want to go to that permissive side because it pulls down that sense of their self-image, their self-worth. Who am I as a person? Okay? Leads to a lot of serious family problems, to be honest with you. Because you even got that kid who's going to grow up in your home and they're going to be compliant because maybe if you're on the authoritarian side, and guess what they're going to do when they go to college? You ain't around. I mean, you know those stories. I mean, you live those stories. Maybe you live those stories, right? I mean, that happens. We lived one through a roommate that Matthew had. It was like, wow, it was just this most stereotypical that you've ever imagined. That it was, I'm out all night, I'm not going to class, I'm just, because I finally have a little bit of room and a little bit of freedom. I'm not criticizing his parents. I don't know his parents. It could have just been his disposition, but I would guess, I think an educated guess, is he probably didn't have any kind of responsibility that he was growing into as he grew up. Make sense? So are your children free to fail? Do you let your children fail?
Yes, but that's so hard.
Oh my gosh.
You want to fix it for them.
Mm-hmm. We kind of touched on going to school and, you know, either bawling out the teacher or trying to get the home, or can he just have one more day and that kind of thing. And again, when you look back at this, I think you said it earlier, when you look back at or I guess it was Lydia, how much does that grade really matter? Well, if we don't use the 6-6-6-6 rule, We say, you know what, the most important thing is that they get a good grade. Well, you know what, the most important thing might be that they learn. So Kristen had just gotten a car. She was 16. We had bought her a little used Honda little car. They actually ended up dying on the side of the road within a year. But she was super excited, and we got it home, and she was not with us when we got it. So we got it home, and she wanted to drive it, so she wanted to drive her to her friend's house. So we drove it over to her friend's house. Her friend knew she was coming, and so I think we drove up, and she honked the horn, and mom and daughter, her friend, started coming out the deal. And Kristen was so excited that instead of pushing on the brake, she pushed on the gas and drove through their garage door. And what do you think happened? Woo! I'm never driving again. I'm not driving this car. I will not drive it home. I'll tell you what happened with me is I burst into hilarious laughter. I just couldn't. I was like, how did this even happen, right? And she wasn't very happy, by the way, with that laughter part. But in the end, I said, oh, you are going to drive it home. There are going to be some consequences. Maybe I'm going to make her pay a little bit of the cost. Maybe not. In this case, we didn't because it was a purely honest mistake. Could have happened to anybody. I want you to think about your kids spilling the milk at the table. Is it their fault because they're kids and they spill the milk? Are you going to spank their butt because they're, no, you can delete that. Because they're kids, they're going to make those mistakes. Now, if on the other hand, she had made some bad decisions, she had chosen to do some things, I still want to walk with her through it and say, no, you are going to get back in the car. You are going to get back behind the wheel. I am not driving, right? Kind of that idea of helping them make it through failure, being firm when it's appropriate if there are consequences that need to happen. So I want you to think about, even without big things like that, in the home, are your kids comfortable asking questions? Can they disagree with you? Can they argue with you? Yes, no? Can they feel angry? Can they feel sad? Can they feel frustrated and disappointed in you? Because I think we kind of have that tendency to say, stop that right now. You may not be angry, like you need to stop that. You shouldn't, we won't say that out loud this way, but you can't feel that way. And is there a way that we can allow them to be angry appropriately, right? I'm not saying that they're being disrespectful. I'm not saying that they're throwing things at you or whatever else. But is it okay for them to be angry? And you to say, you know what? You need to take a little bit of time. Go in your room. You can punch your pillow. You can scream all you want. And then we're going to talk about this. So does that happen at your house? You don't have to share. And if you don't do that, how's that working out for you? Because if we don't talk about it, we have a phrase we use in one of my classes that says, if we don't talk it out, we're going to act it out. So you're going to force them to not have that emotion. It's going to come out somewhere else, right? And it may be health issues. It may be, you know, little kids maybe wet the bed. It may be all kinds of stuff that'll come out because of that. But we need to let them have this ability to feel those emotions, to question us. Now, again, I think you have to really be careful about the respect part. So Matthew is our questioner. Not that all our kids didn't to some extent. Jordan was, I'll tell you a Jordan story instead of a Matthew story. He was the oldest. Matthew was, I don't know what their ages were. They're 7 years apart. So let's say Jordan was 17, Matthew was 10. And Jordan was just not happy with us at all because he wanted to play this game that was rated teen, and he wanted Matthew to be able to play it. And he felt like we were too sheltering of him because he's 17. Of course, he knows everything about parenting. And, you know, you do this, and you do this, and that's just not okay. And he needs to experience more, and you need to do this. And we allowed him to have that conversation, and we're able to say, Jordan, the job and the role we have as a parent is to protect our kids from influences that we don't think is healthy. And we have a responsibility for God to do that. You know what? If I wasn't letting him talk about that, I would have just slammed him. I'd have gone back to kicking, right? I mean, that's been years and years ago, but that's kind of what I wanted to do. Like, you dare question me? I'm the dad. I make these decisions. And what I was able to do in that moment, I don't get it right all the time, I can guarantee you, I'm not batting 1,000, but that was one of my good 300 in there that I was able to say, hey, let's talk about this. You feel that way? Okay, I'm ready to talk about this. When Matthew questions, Matthew, I'm not willing to talk with you if you're not going to be respectful. Okay, you want to be respectful? Great, we can talk about anything you want to talk about. So does that happen in your house? I keep
We're
asking.
dealing with that
Yeah.
ourselves. Instagram, I mean, she's 13,
Mhm.
and we have busted her on it
Mhm.
and gone through the whole thing and put the stuff where we know what she's loading on there.
Right.
And she just keeps doing it again. And the 24-year-old, same debate. He says, you're sheltering her and you're not allowing, and we're like, no, and I didn't handle it like that. I said, well, we're the parents and you make the rules.
Get out of
She got
my
really
face.
upset with me.
Yeah. It's hard to do, but when you start thinking about, I mean, we kind of laid out this, if you remember last week, we laid out these two extremes, an authoritative in the middle, that we said, you should do that. And so I think what we're trying to do with these Magnificent Seven is start helping us think about, well, how do I do that? Well, maybe I need to let them talk a little bit more. Maybe I need to let them disagree and explain why I'm doing some things. And if I can't explain, I think there's probably two possibilities. If I can't explain why I'm doing something, one, it's possible that I don't have a reason. I just don't like it when you do that. And maybe there's not a good enough reason. I think most of the time we haven't had a chance to think it through. And so I think it's perfectly acceptable to say, you know what? I'm happy to talk to you about that. I'm not going to talk to you about that right now, but I want us to sit down and talk to you and then revisit that subject, get your thoughts in order. If you're good on your feet thinker, great, dive right in. If you're not, it's okay to say, I want to talk to you about that, but I'm not going to talk to you about it right now. Thoughts? So we're going to close with this. There's a picture of a messy room on the slide there. And I want you to think about 3 different responses. Let's talk about 3 different ways. I want you to think of a firm but harsh response, so the authoritarian. I want you to think of an indecisive, kind of permissive kind of way of dealing with this. And then let's talk about firm and fair. We're on number 3, or number 2, firm but fair. We'll see how far we get next week. So here's the story. 11-year-old Percy, that's important, has neglected his regularly assigned chores again, cleaning his room and the dog pen. He's supposed to have these tasks done by Friday of each week. It is now 8:30 Saturday morning and his soccer game starts in half an hour. His mother's discovered his chores aren't done and she is already running late for an appointment of her own. She tells her husband what happened. Dad calls Percy in and says, your room isn't clean and the dog pen is still filthy. Those chores were supposed to be done by Friday night. We'd agreed on that, right? But Dad, there was a really good program on TV and I just forgot. Remember, he's 11 years old. Well, I think you'd better get your room cleaned up and the dog pen too right now. But Dad, I'm going to be late for my soccer game. The team needs me. I'm the only goalie we've got. So what is the firm but harsh response?
You're gonna miss your soccer game.
Yep. Can you be harsher than that?
Or I'll slap you around a couple.
No, that's not true. You're gonna admit, right? You're gonna miss not just this week's game, but you're missing next week's game for talking back to me. Don't talk back to me.
It would be television laws and phone.
Television laws, phone, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, all those different things, right? So we got a lot of grounding because we set the expectation really clear and you didn't follow it. I think this is a great and very difficult exercise. The first 2 are easy. So what if you are the indecisive parent? What are you gonna tell a little person?
That's okay.
Well,
We'll get
do
to
you
it later.
promise you'll do it later?
And then not hold their feet to the fire. We come back from the game or whatever.
And we roll around and it's next Friday and now we got 2 weeks of
Or
room.
we just went out and did it for him.
Ooh, even worse.
Yeah.
Percy's been really busy and he did want to see that program that, last night. And so it was a good program. There was some educational elements, right? That's obviously the easy ways to do things wrong. Although I think we'd say easy like, duh, what stupid parent would do that? And I think we do it all the time, okay? But what about a firm and fair? I think this is a little harder. How could you be firm but fair?
Well, you don't want to penalize the team.
Okay,
Because it's not obviously their fault. So maybe you allow him to go,
okay,
but then knowing it's a Saturday, he's going to have to spend the rest of the time after that
okay.
cleaning room plus dog pen, whatever.
Plus additional chores.
And
Yay.
Maybe, yeah, I mean, because.
Baseboards, baseboards, baseboards.
And Alicia, I just kind of started like doing a chore cycle with the girls. I mean, broken several up, and each one of them had 2, this past week, and then we'll reassign. They kind of switched that. I said, I have to keep getting on you, or you start griping about it, you may have to do it more, or you may have someone else's to do on top of that.
Nice.
So maybe if there's other sibling, other chores for this individual,
Yeah.
let
So,
him go to the game, because obviously you don't want to penalize that, but yet you're going to have to come home and do that, maybe at the, expense of being able to do some other fun things maybe you had in mind. I mean,
because I think this is almost, I'm not saying obvious, but it's a really good one. I think it's a great one. First off, before we go to another one, how do you feel about that? Real life, you're 11-year-old. Are you gonna do that?
I mean, for me, I'd be like, no, we're not going to do the game, you're going to do that. I'd probably maybe err on the stricter thing,
Yep.
but yet they are part of this team. I mean, it's
Yep.
kind of, I don't know. I mean,
We divide at our house because Paul would be the one to be like, we're not going.
You're just not going, you're missing it.
I would be the one saying.
Do what?
Right.
You should have sat by her, I think. You could have elbowed her right there. And you would have said,
I would say, "Oh, the team will suck."
I'll
Yeah.
pick up your room. Would you do that?
I have done that.
Okay, well, there you go. See, she's only throwing you under the bus because she's willing to throw herself under the bus.
See, I'd rake her stuff up out of the floor and throw it away.
Uh-huh. So that's a fantastic solution. Are there other things you might think of doing? Firm but fair. Because we want little Percy to suffer some consequences, right?
Well, Percy blamed the TV program
Aha.
for
Yeah.
not doing his chores.
Mhm.
So the TV would have to go.
So, back in the olden days, we would have said, you're going to miss next Friday night. You're not going to get to watch that, which meant it just disappeared into oblivion, right? Of course, now we just TiVo it or whatever and watch it on Netflix. But still, the idea of, well, maybe we're going to miss TV for a few nights this week, because that seemed to be your problem, right? What else? Any other thoughts? Firm but fair. Is there a way to be firm but fair and have him miss the game? I don't know. I don't have one in my head.
Let them go to the game, but not let them participate.
Ah, interesting. Because there may be some kid. Wow, that feels horrible. Thank you for saying that. There may be some kid that's been dying to try out for goalie. I mean, we don't know, right? So I don't know.
Well, I can tell you, at 11, and I was 13 now, but Tyler was worse than the little one.
Yeah.
They do not want you in their room, and so yes, I have cleaned her
Ooh.
room, but that worries her more.
That is an
than
interesting.
anything else.
Know your kids. That may be the worst punishment is, okay, you can go to the game, but you'll clean the dog pen and you're going to do these 5 other chores, but I'm going to pick up your room. Or dad's going to pick up your room. And if there's stuff missing, sorry, you'll just have to, live without it. So you have that. I really just want to point out that every kid, you have to think differently. I almost feel like we're trying to teach you how to make them maximum miserable. That's really not what I'm trying to say. But that you figure out what is it to them, because they are going to make mistakes. How much of it is spilt milk? And you know what? That's just what kids are going to do sometimes. How much of it is, let me step on your toes, should you maybe have said, hey, remember tonight's Friday night. I know you're watching that TV program, but Saturday morning, if you don't have that done, there's going to be consequences for that. Because the soccer game. I'm not trying to put it all on your shoulders, but part of guiding them is helping them see the decisions they're making. What are the ramifications? Kids don't have that. Heck, I don't think 19-year-olds have that sometimes. Yeah, they don't always have it either. So certainly 11 and 12 and 13-year-olds, there's a lot of reminding that goes on.
You gotta get your blood in early.
Sure.
If you're only dealing with this, I mean, not that you can't change, but when you're 3, they needed to know what no meant. 2, my dad said 18 months. 18 months.
Yeah.
They know what no meant.
Nice.
The older I get, the more I believe he was right. It's not too late to change, but it's sure a lot harder.
It's always easier to ease up.
If they know
Then it
that
is
you're
to-
gonna do it, if you say, then it carries them already.
Well, we do things for our children constantly that we don't, for instance, Tucker didn't have his shoes at the basketball game yesterday.
You drove around, turned around, drove home?
No.
Well, I thought about going to buy some more from.
Okay.
But I was like, son, you have a game. Well, they're always in mom's car because mom always takes care of them. He wound up sharing Jake's in
Okay.
between, but still, mine, I was just like, let's just go home,
Yeah.
or he's just gonna sit there and not play. Because when do you start that? Well, it's your response. I mean, he's 10 years old. He knows he's going to a basketball game, so we might want to make sure.
But I really carry the blame for that because I've always made sure everything was in the car. And I do need to be more responsible.
And I'm not saying that's the answer to every situation, but sometimes we have to look at it and go, you know what, they just made an honest mistake. There really was a good reason for him to think, it really is, mom always takes care of that. I'm not saying what you did or didn't do is right or wrong. I'm just saying that we've got to realize that when we get into that idea of how do I guide my children in healthy authority? Not the unhealthy authority that says, well, I'll show you, I'm the big man, I'm the big woman, I'll do it. It says, I understand that there are certain things that are out of your control, but there are certain things that are in your control. And when you mess up, what I'm trying to do is teach you for going forward, right, for the future. We need to stop. We're going to come back next week and start with number 3. And I think we might even have a PowerPoint, which just helps me and it really helps you. So let's pray together. Lord, we thank you for the responsibility that you've given us as parents. Father, it is intimidating. It is scary when we try and it seems like the things that we try don't work. Father, as much as anything today, I pray that you would help us to see that that's 2/3 of the time that a batter misses the ball, and he's still a fantastic player. Father, I pray that you would help us not to sit down, but we would continue to try to swing, and that you would help us to continue to try to use those natural consequences, that reality discipline, Father, that we would choose to be creative as parents, and we would find ways to encourage our kids and guide them, but also hold them accountable. Pray that as we continue this conversation, you would give us more understanding and more ideas. But Father, as we close, we just ask that you would remind us that these aren't just people, small people in our charge. They are your children. We are stewards of these little lives, these spirits, Father, that stand before you. And Father, we pray that as we pray for them and as we teach them about you, Father, you would just give us wisdom, help us to grow in our own spiritual development so that we might be able to lead and guide them in deeper walk with you. They would look to us and say, I want to be a follower. I want to be like mom. I want to be more like dad. I want to do those things because I've learned from them. I've seen the value in their lives. Lord, we pray that you would walk with us in these days. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Have a great week. And Dr. Sue, I'm assuming you're not coming back next week?
Maybe not.
Okay. So he just wanted to test some stuff out. If anybody came in late, he's testing out some new technology. So I don't think you're going to be on YouTube or anything.